Hello everyone, my name is Rachel Fernandez and I'm the co-president of the Computer Science Club here at Westminster High School. Let's get right into it. So to begin, we actually need you guys to create a Replit account if you don't already have one. This website is basically going to allow you to code and follow along with me. Here are the instructions. If you ever need any help, feel free to email me, but I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory. So go ahead and pause the video and then move on once you're ready. Okay, so before we actually start, let's go over why we chose Python. Well, to put it simply, it's super duper popular right now, and because of that, there are lots of resources available to learn and lots of code available to reuse. It has a massive community, and you can basically use Python for almost anything. So people use it for mathematics, of course, programming, AI, machine learning, robotics, competitive programming, and so much more. And the main reason that we chose Python is if you can understand Python, then you're going to have a much easier time understanding other programming languages. It's super versatile and available on many different platforms. So here are the table of contents, basically what we are going to be going over today. Okay, so let's start off. This is an IDE. I know it sounds complicated, but it's an integrated development environment. And it's basically just a place for you to code. A couple of the ones that we recommend is Visual Studio Code, VS Code, Replit, and PyCharm. VS Code is pretty popular amongst most programmers. It is software that you do have to download. PyCharm is, I think, specifically built for Python, and it is also software that you can download. And then Replit is the thing that we're going to be using today. It's web-based, meaning it is a website. Okay, so let's go over print statements. For your beginner, this is the very first line of code that you'll ever be writing, but please just write print, parentheses, quotation marks, hello world, exclamation mark, quotation marks, parentheses in your Replit, and hit run, and hopefully your output should be hello world. It's pretty self-explanatory what print does. It basically prints whatever is in those quotation marks. And yeah, on the right side, we do have some more complicated stuff. This is how to include quotation marks in your print statement, or in your the thing that you want to print, but that's something that's more advanced, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. I do want to emphasize that you can use double quotes or you can use single quotes, whichever works. Okay, so let's move on to comments. So what are comments usually used for? Usually they are used for telling users what specific parts of your code does, and or just explaining tasks of your code. It's whenever you run, Python is not going to evaluate your comments, meaning it's basically just going to ignore it and then run only the uncommented lines. So hashtags here are used for single line comments, and then the 3 double quotes are used for multi-line comments. And as you can see in this example, line 1 and 2 is single line comments, and so this is commented out, meaning Python's going to ignore it. And then lines 4 through 9 are multi-line comments, so again, Python's also going to ignore it. And line 10 is the only uncommented piece of code. So Python is going to run this, and as you can see, it does end up working in the console, and it says nothing printed lol, just like it says on line 10. Okay, so we're going to be going over our next thing, which is variables and concatenation. This is going to seem complicated, but we're going to break it down and it's going to make sense. So what is a variable? Basically, variables store information. So let's say you had a program asking a user to input their age. Their age would be stored in a variable. So right here, we set the variable student count to 20. Then we're going to set club name, another variable, equal to the string computer science. Now, what's a string? A string is a list of characters, letters, numbers, etc. It's a collection of those things, and it's always surrounded by a double quote or a single quote, as you can see here. And it can be as small as just a single letter to as big as multiple paragraphs, as long as it's in between those quotes. So now we're going to actually do something. We're going to do print, parentheses, there are, so you guys are pretty familiar with how this is going to work. It's just going to print there are, plus str student count. Now, what just happened? What is str? Well, whenever we do concatenation in, I guess, any programming language, concatenation is basically combining strings together, and that's what we do when we use the addition symbol right here. So, in any programming language, when you want to concatenate or you want to combine strings together, you need to make sure that everything is a string. So, right now, student count is equal to 20. 20 is a number, or in computer science, what we call an integer. So if we didn't have str here, we would say there are, so this is a string because it's in between the quotes, plus student count, which is an integer. And remember, we can't add things together if one's a string and one is an integer. So what we need to do is we need to convert that integer into a string, which is what we do when we do str, which stands for string, parentheses, and then we put the variable name inside. And what that's going to do is convert student count into a string inside this print statement. So there are plus, this is combining it with something else, 20 plus students in the plus club name, which remember we set equal to computer science earlier, plus club. So when we run this all, and you can put this in your code to follow along, we get print there are 20 students in the computer science club. And remember, it's very important to emphasize, you can only combine strings in the print statement. If you're adding things together, which is concatenation with the addition symbols, everything needs to be a string. You can't add a string and an integer together. That just doesn't work. Okay, so we're going to be going over data types now. So the main ones that we're going to be focusing on are integers, floats, booleans, strings, and lists. So this is kind of your cheat sheet over here, but an integer, like I emphasized earlier, is just a number, but in computer science we call it an integer. Float is a number, but it has numbers after the decimal point, as you can see right here. A boolean is a type of data type, obviously, and it's either set to true or false. And booleans are really helpful, but that's, as you can see here, we call it bool here, but like x equals true or x equals false. It's always true or false. And make sure that you have the true capitalized, have the T or the F capitalized whenever you write it. Otherwise, the programming language isn't going to be able to identify it. Next we have string, which I kind of already explained earlier, but it's just a collection of letters, characters, numbers, etc., as you can see right here, and it's always in between quotation marks. And then we have a list. So a list is a collection of items. So as you can see right here, we have the variable x equal to, and it's a list, and it contains red and blue. So we won't be going so much into lists in this programming workshop, but definitely in the future you will be using a list a lot while you're programming. So now we're going to go over the second part of data types. So there's two. There's primitive types and their containers. So primitive types can only store one value. So for example, an integer or a float only has one value, versus containers contain multiple different values. For example, you could have a list that has multiple floats, multiple integers, but remember, primitive types only store one value, containers store multiple. Or it can store one, but it usually can store multiple. Okay, so for operators, we have the basic operators. We have the addition symbol, subtraction, multiplication, division, and then we have two new special ones that come with computer science. So the double slash basically does division and then takes away the decimal. So let's say we had 5 divided by 2. Normally, it would be 2.5, but with the integer divide operator, the answer would be 2. It basically gets rid of every number after the decimal. And the modulus operator basically does the division and takes the remainder. So let's stick with our example of 5 divided by 2. Normally, it would be 2.5, right? But the modulus operator would give us the output of 1. Let's give another example, 6 divided by 2. The modulus operator would output 0 because 6 divided by 2 is 3 with no remainder. And then here are some more operators that we won't really be getting so much into because they are a bit more advanced, but they basically help simplify tasks. And if you guys are interested, feel free to Google it and check it all out. And that applies to the rest of this workshop. If there's anything you see on the right that's maybe a little more advanced, but you want to check it out, feel free to Google it and research it on your own. Okay, so now we have conditionals. If and else are the two basic conditional statements. So conditional statements are basically conditions where if they are true, they run something. So let's look at this diagram over here. Let's say we have 5. We're going to test 5 in this first conditional. Is 5 larger than 0? That's true. So if that's true, that means the sign is positive. This means that we would run the code on this side because it's true. Let's say we had a negative number. Let's say we had -5. Let's test -5. Is -5 larger than 0? That's false. So we move on to the second condition. Is -5 smaller than 0? It is. That's true. So we move over here and then we run this following code. Let's say we tested 0. Is 0 larger than 0? No. So you go down here. Is the number smaller than 0? False, meaning the sign is neutral. So this is basically what they look like in programming. I'm just going to explain this little example first here. So look, this is a comment. If you guys already know what that is. But in the second line, we set a variable equal to true. And this is an example of a Boolean. And here we're going to set up a while loop. So while loops are a little bit harder to understand, but basically it's just saying while some conditional is true or not true, run the following code. So here we're saying while 1 exclamation mark equals 0. Exclamation mark equals basically saying is not equal to. So we're saying while 1 is not equal to 0, run the following code. So now we have an if and else statement. Here we're saying if walking equals false. So equals is checking if it is equal to each other. So here we were checking if they were not equal to each other. Here we're checking if they're equal to each other. So if walking is equal to false, you run the following code. Else or otherwise run this code. So let's test this. So we have walking equals true. While 1 is equal to 0, 1 is equal to 0, so we run the following code. If true is equal to false, we're going to run Chester's walking. It's not. So now we're actually going to go down here, and we're going to go to the else, and we're going to print Chester is not walking. So over here we have that code, and as you can see, we hit run, and whoa, this is running for a really long time. Do you guys know why? It's because 1 equals 0 is forever. It never changes. 1 is never equal to 0. So that's why this code just continues to run forever and ever and ever. That's why over here we have on line 9 break, which is going to break the while loop from running on continuously forever, and it only gives us one output, which is what we want. Okay, so now we're going to get into user inputs. In my opinion, this is probably one of the more fun parts of programming, which is actually being able to interact with your code. Besides actually programming it yourself, you can input your own stuff into the code, which is pretty exciting. So how we do user inputs is right here. Let's just start with an example. So we have the variable name, and it's equal to input, what is your name, ? So what we're doing here is we're saying the variable name is equal to whatever the user inputs when we ask them what is your name. So here we're going to make a second variable, and we're going to call it introduction. And we're going to print the string hi plus name, which we said was whatever the user inputted when we asked them what is your name, plus how are you. So when we hit run, and guys feel free to run this because it's actually pretty fun, the console is going to ask us, what is your name? And you can input your name, and it's going to output. Oh, by the way, when you type in your name, you do have to hit enter, so it actually moves forward. and it's going to type, what is your name? And then you put, for example, Tian, and it says, hi Tian, how are you? So yeah. Okay, let's move on to user inputs part 2. So here we're kind of applying what we learned with the operators like multiplication, division, addition, all of that. And we're going to be applying some of the stuff that we learned earlier. So let's just get straight into the example. Line 2, we make a variable called math input, and it's equal to int input, insert first number you want to multiply. I should say multiply, my bad. So here, let's break it down. Let's start with the inside first. It's saying we want the input from the user when we ask them insert first number you want to multiply. Then, whatever the user inputs, we're going to turn it into an integer. That's what the int does, and in parentheses, what you want it to turn into an integer. Then, we make the second variable called calculator, and it's equal to a similar looking thing, int, parentheses, input, parentheses, input second number you want to multiply. So, similar. We're basically turning whatever the user inputs when we ask them this into an integer. Now we're making a new variable, calling it my_num, and it's equal to the math input, which remember is the number that they reply with when we ask them this question. And remember, it's an integer because we turned it into an integer, multiplied by the second input that the user says. So when we print this, we print the number it calculated was plus str my_num. So remember, when we're concatenating things, which what we're doing with the addition symbol, we need to add a string together and a string together. And remember, we set both of these equal to integers. So remember, we need to turn it into a string, which is what we do with the str. So we're printing the number calculated was, and then the number. So let's say we ran this. You can run this. Insert first number you want to multiply. Let's say you said 5. And then the input second number you want to multiply, you put 4. Then line 4 is going to say my_num equals 5 times 4. And then we're going to print the number calculated was, remember, you're going to turn 20 into a string so that it can be added together, 20. Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's actually pretty cool. I love working with user inputs. You can make really cool projects with user inputs and make them interactive and really fun. It makes you look like a professional coder. It collects user information, and we can also use user input to trigger another piece of code. Okay, so next thing that we're going to be going over is an array list. So you guys remember earlier we went over primitive data types versus containers. So an array list is a container. So here it's also kind of a list. So on line 2, we make the variable supplies names equal to the list of all these items. We have pencil, eraser, glue, pen, paper, staples, and calculator. And then what we're doing is we want to make another variable called x, and we're setting it equal to school supplies brackets 1. Now, what the heck is that? Well, whenever we do a list name, brackets, and then a number inside, that number is called an index, and it's basically looking for the item with the index of 1. So indexes basically describe the position of an item in a list. So normally we would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But in computer science, we actually start counting at 0 for reasons that you'll understand better if you continue to program. So here this would actually be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as you can see over here. And so we're saying the variable x is equal to school supplies. We're looking for the item with the index of 1, which is eraser, and we're going to print that, we're going to print x, and we get eraser. Okay everyone, that was the end of our workshop. We really hope that you guys enjoyed that. Please give us any feedback if you can. Here are some resources that you can rely on. W3 School, I love it. I use it for almost any programming language, from Python to web development. I love it. There's also Python like you mean it. And then as for programs and workshops, we have Codecademy, Ucode, and then honestly, something I really recommend is just looking for workshops, whether it's online on YouTube or you find it through social media. They can be really helpful, and they can they can open you up to seeing many different sides of programming. So thanks for coming. Here is our Discord. This is the best place to ask questions. If you have any questions, please email us at whschester@gmail.com. If you have any questions at all, I would love to answer them. I want to emphasize that it's really important to ask questions in computer science because it's the only way that you're going to learn. If you are stuck on something, you need to ask questions because otherwise you're going to be confused for the rest of your code, you know? So please ask us any questions. If you had any problems with this workshop or you want to learn something new, we can 100% guide you to new resources. And yeah,